Well, thanks everybody for joining this small and exclusive group of people this morning. Appreciate there's quite a lot of people on leave and various things, but nonetheless, I mean, I'm happy to share the slides afterwards, Graham, if you want to circulate, and
Yes,
if
please.
people want to come back to me and have a through you and facilitate, any other questions as such. Um, so Graham asked me just to come and talk a little bit about local partnerships and reflect and provide some insight on some of the work that I am doing and potentially have been doing historically, because I think it's all relevant. For me, very much a renaissance, if you like, in the environmental climate, call it what you will, green movement over the last sort of nearly 30 years that I've been working in that space. And I think there's lots of challenges that we've got, but lots of opportunities. So I thought the first thing to do would be just to really give you, and actually, Graham, you did a really good job in a paragraph of explaining what local partnerships was, but I'd like to provide a little bit more depth, because I think um, as an organisation, although we have a very specific mandate, we do touch a lot of different areas, both thematically and organisationally. And I think for that reason, that gives quite a lot of in-depth opportunities that we can see in terms of connecting people, connecting organisations. So I'm going to take sort of the liberty, as I would be expected to do by my Marcoms director, of just giving you a few slides to give a bit of depth as the organisation, and that in itself might be quite useful, I hope. So as Graham put in the email earlier, we're owned by the Local Government Association, HM Treasury, and the Welsh Government. And that puts us in a useful position whereby, because we are owned by them, we can basically work for them and help them to be more efficient, more effective, drop in when they suddenly need us for various technical or organisational um, uh, activities. But importantly, we provide the interface between local and central government. So, for example, when the Labour government came in last July, or year ago, over a year ago now, we were asked to engage as many local authorities as we could about the missions and the pledges, with the key question about um, how do we help local authorities deliver those missions and manifesto pledges at a local level. And that was really interesting. So, I mean, I spent many a workshop in August and September last year with local authority chief execs and directors, trying to navigate and basically say, what is it that we can tell central government through the local government association that can help you do what you need to do, whether that's place-based, whether that's new powers, um, specific things like compulsory purchase orders to get projects through, all those sorts of things. So that was useful in itself. And it's that interface between the local and the central government that is a space we try and occupy and try to support both sides of that dynamic. But it doesn't escape me that, in my mind, it tends to work in triangles, in threes, is that the component to that is the community, the local based organizations and individuals working at the coalface, if you want to use that non-climate change term, but at grassroots level. So what we do is we do a lot of things around major infrastructure, definitely tackling climate change challenges, and I'll talk about our organizational characteristics, if you like, and how we all fit together. We do a lot of things about waste efficiency and renewable energy particularly, but very much on a place-based public sector ecosystem basis. Been around 15 years, formed out of different organizations that were sort of spin-offs with specific roles, and then brought together that 15 years ago to form local partnerships. We have three main business service offers, if you like, and teams. We have the climate team, which hopefully you'll appreciate is one of the biggest within. So that shows you really where our space, our activity space is. So that's everything from energy efficiency, waste, housing, regeneration. Definitely a lot in the new finance. We try not to use green finance, because talking to big finance houses and investors, finance is finance, no matter it's green, brown, or tartan. and a lot of transformational stuff. We also have commercial and place teams that are lesser in numbers of people. So we try to basically work with local authorities to help renegotiate for them, particularly around PFI and PPP programs, get them a better deal. And that can involve, energy contracts as well. We have within our team in-house solicitors, lawyers, if you want to use the current parlance. I still call them solicitors. Commercial accountants from big, organizations like PwC, for example. And a lot of our team members are ex-chief execs, having worked up the ranks, exec directors who've done specific things in this space. We also have the place team, which does a lot around housing and regeneration, health and social care. We've done work for the NHS, CCGs, and ICB, so integrated care boards as well. And which I'll touch again in a few slides' time, we're very involved in the local government reorganisation and devolution piece, because that has a massive impact at a local level, with the current 300 odd local authorities being reduced down to a much smaller number. There we go. What we try to do is any work that we do, even though we are effectively a consultancy, we like to call ourselves more of a public sector improvement organisation. So we're asked to help where they don't have the skills, they don't have the time, or there's an urgent need. And when we do that, we always make sure that whatever we do as a result is shared within the wider local authority public sector community. We don't hold secrets in that regard. So if we produce a toolkit or a dashboard or some sort of tool, we make sure it's available. So there's some examples there that you can get from our website in the resource hub. So you can get our climate adaptation toolkit, the domestic retrofit handbook, greenhouse gas accounting tool, for example, and a number of other things. And the idea is that then other organizations can use those for free, because it's been paid for by the public person, should be available to everybody. We've done a lot of stuff, as you might expect, through COVID, but also more recently some PFI contracts which are about to expire. And normally, again, not my area of expertise, but definitely colleagues have had some really good wins in terms of those, in renegotiating much better terms, financial terms for the local authorities involved. We always put within our terms of conditions that we will always share best practice. We have that written in from day one. So if somebody asks us to do a piece of work, a local authority, for example, and we've done it already, we don't just repackage and sell it again for the price they're willing to pay. We say, actually, we can just, that's a day's work. We've done some of this before. Let's just do a quick review and do it for what you need. So we are there to support them. If you're interested, I'm not going to go through all the stats on the screen. We do an annual impact report to demonstrate why we have an impact and why we are there to do what we do. And you've got obviously metrics to do with carbon, to do with money, to do with generation, if it's about renewable energy, and the number of people that we engage with and how many people use our various tools and resources that we produce. I'm going to very quickly, because I obviously want to get to the hub of, or the nub, if you like, of the discussion today, but to give you a little bit more depth as to those three areas. And I won't talk about what's on the left. I'll just talk to the right screen, and obviously afterwards you can have a look at my slides. So as I mentioned before, resource efficiency and waste is a very big thing. We call it zero waste. That's the ambition. We're doing a lot of work. We have quite a big team looking at a whole range of opportunities with local authorities and quite often their supply chain and subcontractors in that space. We do a lot of work within renewables. We've helped local authorities to create better renewable energy or low carbon energy systems for financial benefit as well as carbon benefit for those local authorities. So they become less reliant and the less money has to be spent. And that goes hand in glove, as you'd expect, with the energy efficiency side, making sure that their buildings, their assets are as efficient and as effective as possible. We also do a lot around the net zero and climate adaptation piece. We're doing quite a lot of work at the moment with DFT across the UK, What I didn't say earlier on is because of our ownership structure being predominantly England and Wales, we do work in Scotland, but they are classed as what, and in Northern Ireland, but those are classed as non-owner work. And we have in a unique position where we have to work for our owners 80% of our turnover. We try to be cost neutral, but if we do make a profit at the end of the year, that is returned to our owners with a suggestion of where we think those local authorities and public sector organisations need some support where there's no funding available, on the basis that we can then suggest, actually, there's a profit here. Would you like to spend that with them in the next year? Because they've told us they want some help in this space. So we try to circulate the money that way. A few examples, again, I'm not going to run through them, but we've been working with the net zero hubs, which you may have heard of. There are 5 of those in England run by DESNZ, in a whole range of things. We've done specific things around baseline for emissions to make sure that those local authorities with a good ambition in the climate space have got that robust evidence base to work from. I worked on the West Suffolk project around their local plan. So really pushing the boundary, and then the inspectors going, well, you can't do that. And then they're sort of in a position where we support them, give them the robust evidence, say, well, actually you can. And other inspectors in other local authority areas have allowed this under these bases. So it's that supporting mechanism. And things like heat networks, as you may be familiar, so Milton Keynes, amongst others. We do a lot of work in London as well, looking at the opportunity for citywide heat networks or big urban area heat networks, because it's good practice and it's good opportunity for local authorities to start to generate their own income for reinvestment. A number of local authorities will invest in the sort of renewable energy space, and the return they get, they can use for things that are less well supported by government grants. For example, adult social care. There are good examples in the east of England where that's been the case, for example. I put this one up because I think this is a community one. So might be familiar with National Certificate Infrastructure Planning, sort of NSIPs. Those are where we try to work with the local authority to get a much better community benefit, usually within financial areas. This is an area that a particular colleague of mine has done a lot of work with Rutland and other local authorities. We have a number of live clients at the moment who we are looking at pushing the sort of boundaries with the big renewable energy infrastructure. So people that do wind farms, for example, offshore. Sizewell is another example. And rather than them saying, here's a pot of money, get your communities to bid for it, we are trying to make the suggestion now with success that you need to not only just say, here's a pot of money, let's put solar PV on village halls, for example, which is obviously a common thing, or invest in playgrounds, is be a bit more holistic about it, and allow those communities with their local authorities to be very much in the driving seat. And we've helped with a number of pieces of guidance in that space, as well as examples. Alan, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, Paul, I'm interested here because the community benefit for a new solar farm, obviously it's how to gear that to the way that you discuss it with the developer. Are you engaged in that process, or do you have some documentation to support that process for local authorities?
A number of my colleagues have done that over the last 3 or 4 years, this being one of the examples, and some others around Oxfordshire and now the east of England. I'm going to be more involved with that. If you want to ping me an email afterwards, if you've got any specific areas that you want me to have a look for, any guidance that we've got, or anything in the public domain I can share with you,
sure.
Then I'm happy to do that.
Brilliant. We're just in the throes of doing that for Shropshire. That's why I asked.
Okay.
Revamping ours.
I mean, because we've got sort of expertise in that space, proven and successful expertise, normally, if a local authority doesn't know we can help them, they don't know to come to us. So examples like this, where somebody else says, actually, we would like to derive a much more holistic, longer term benefit over 20 years, for example, multi-million pounds worth of money available, rather than the developer, the renewable energy developer, having if you like, control over that, and piecemeal putting it out. I mean, there's a couple of models whereby the whole chunk of money for a year could be then used as an investment pot, or multiplied with another funding pot, for example, because of the order of magnitude, to derive much higher levels of investment. It's it's the old adage that it's easy to ask for lots of money when you're trying to get investment than it is for small amounts of money.
Yeah.
The effort is the same, but quite often if you can build a 20-30 million pound project over a number of years, the public-private investment there is usually a lot more easy to access because it's viable. And the investors that we've been working with I've said that. So yeah, if there's anything I can help you with, definitely do that. Just ping me an email.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Just to quickly touch on the other two facets because they are important. So we do a lot of commercial support, a lot of transformation, PFI, PPP that I mentioned before on our commercial team. But what we do find is that team members in that one, particularly in the sort of the legal and commercial accounting side, are very useful on the other sides. So helping those local authorities and their some of them wholly owned companies, some of their local authority teams, and other organisations that work like parish and town council, very well developed community groups, for example, to bring that expertise in, because quite often a local authority doesn't need on a long-term basis that expertise, and it's not good value always to bring a specialist in, or to employ somebody who then after the piece of work's done, it's they sort of have to then look what they're doing next. We can sort of drop in, do what they need, and then leave them with the skills, leave them with some cascade training if they need it, give them with the toolkit or some sort of analytical piece, and then they can do it themselves. And that's what we try to do, is sort of grow their expertise. The place team is more sort of as you would expect, place-based, a lot of housing and regeneration, a lot of infrastructure. Health and well-being is quite an important one as well. We've done quite a lot of work with social care, a lot of mapping work to try and get them to understand the benefits associated with, for example, well-being, and particular social care contracts, social prescribing that's been buzzing around. And when I was at university, working for the university as well, that was very innovative at the time and now quite a commonplace thing. So, and of course, local government reform and devolution is a major agenda item at the moment. There's a lot of local authorities having to navigate that, and we are supporting that and having active discussions with them so that they know the sort of where others have done it. It's not a new thing specifically. We've got a lot of combined authorities in England already, and it's turning that experience to the people that are having to navigate it now, so it's not seen as a as a major challenge or a big worry for them. Just a couple of examples there. Prisons building homes is something we're doing at the moment. I think the title speaks for itself, but also in Wales we have quite a high profile in Wales. About a half of our work is in Wales. We work with the Welsh Government and all of the local authorities there. Sustainable Communities for Learning programme there. It's trying to sort of build that at that grassroots community local level. And then finally, what wraps around everything is our data and analytics team. Probably as no surprise, they help us do a lot of both GIS and statistical mapping, and more common now, a lot of AI-based machine learning systems, so that we can help, whether you think it's on a personal level, the way forward or not, we have to respond to it. It's what a lot of local authorities are doing and trying for a good reason, because it does bring some efficiencies. But what we will always say is there has to be a human element. So you can start off with an artificial process, but it needs a human check at the end of it, and that's where we tend to help as well. But our data analytics team are growing. We do local area energy plans and a whole range of other waste flows and different modelings, and a lot of financial modelling as well. So that's local partnerships. So hopefully you'll get from that we are an organisation that touches lots of different points. we have to work for public sector or local authority clients. We cannot work for the private sector. That's our mandate, and our, if you like, our professional license to do so. But for me, the partnering and collaboration is something we do for everything. So, in my short tenure so far, I've done projects with local authorities, and I brought in other organisation with the specialism, but maybe not the capacity to do something. So where we do a piece of work, for example, I've worked for it, just recently finished a piece of work with the county council in the retrofit space. So looking at housing, it's something that touches everybody. And interestingly, funded by the public health director for the county. And more interesting for me is that we engaged 45 different organisations from all sectors. So there were community there were a lot of social and cultural and faith groups involved. The idea being that we would create and co-design and co-produce a housing retrofit strategy that made sure it referenced the technical and practical elements, the skills and training elements, the engagement and the if you like, the traditional communication side, but also understanding finance and funding, two very different things on a spectrum. So I think what I've tried to show here is that actually by working with local groups, community groups, parish and town councils, SMEs in a specific area, location-based organisations, it helps local authorities in the public sector get a far deeper trust and legitimacy to what they're doing. It definitely stimulates community empowerment. I found it to be far more effective in targeting using so that group of 45 and their reach across that county was quite impactful. Certainly when you engage a lot more local people, you get that lived experience clearly and that deeper understanding of those local needs, because there are similarities across England and the UK, but there are obviously clear differences. I think you get better decision making, particularly where a local authority works with its local community organisations, and clearly you get this social inclusion and cohesion as a result. Clearly you get shared learning, and most of the time you get innovation. Some colleagues of mine like Penny Poyser in Nottingham are doing some really interesting stuff around redevelopment in Nottingham, for example. But for me, it's that informed, practical, and culturally appropriate solutions. So yeah, a lot of these are the sort of buzzwords, co-design and co-production, but we know that that's the way things should be done. You get the ownership and the solutions. And I think from a local authority perspective, the adaptive governance that they benefit from, that local to district, borough, city, county, is really important for them. And I don't think this comes as any surprise or to any of you in terms of the work that I guess that you're doing, but it becomes a much richer and far more informed and quite often accelerated process when you partner and collaborate. And we do it all the time. We've got actually something in the region of 600 associates. Now those aren't people that are just people on the books. Those are people that we've actually done work with. So we bring an associate on when we don't have a specific expertise, or sometimes it can be capacity, because somebody says we need this doing and we need it doing before the end of the financial year, and it's the 1st of March, which is quite common. So we'll bring we've got 600 people. Those have all done a project with us or more than one project. If there is an area that we need to move into, and we have a specific business need and a client, we will bring new people in on that basis. So yeah, working with others is key. In the email that Graham put out to you, I just suggested that I'd talk about my personal perspective on, and I call it LA21 to net zero, LA21 being Local Agenda 21. And this is effectively my potted history. Not, I can go on for many slides along with the detail, but I thought I'd pick up a few key points that for me are milestones, is probably a good explanation or description of what what I've seen over time. So I started my career as a local Agenda 21 officer, doing some of the very first recycling schemes in a Nottinghamshire local authority. LA21 came out of, I'm sure you're aware, the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit in 1992, June of 92, where they said 2/3 of activities needed to happen at a local level. So that was straight away pushed to local authorities, and that's my first local authority job. And I have to say, there was a lot of goodwill and a lot of individuals at a local level wanting to do things. I then moved more into the sort of home energy conservation piece, HECA as it was called, around 1995, 97, where people were starting to realise, and there was quite a bit of grant money available to help them in their homes. And we still need that to today, but the reason I picked this up is because it was I used to drive a 27-foot long energy bus all around Norfolk, going to every single fete event possible to talk to people about home energy, about environmental issues. And it gained a lot of interest. We were always invited. I mean, most of my weekends from sort of April, May through to September were out and about at various things, going to schools. And there was definitely a feeling that message was going from school back to home. Roll forward to sort of 2010, we had feed-in tariff. 2011, the first plug-in car grant schemes from government. And I think what that also did is that started to sort of indicate to the supply chain, as well as individuals and homeowners and small businesses, not in the supply chain, but just small businesses, the need for that movement into things that help them to become more resilient, particularly around the energy side. And there was a financial incentive. And then 2014, World Bank UN Climate Conference turned net zero. Some academics will say that was floating around about a year before. Now, for me personally, net zero on its own doesn't mean anything. People will talk about net zero economics. What does that mean? For me, it's about net zero carbon. And as a dean of an environmental faculty of one of the eminent climate change local universities said, we haven't been net zero for over 1,000 years. But I think it was more about the ambition than it was the intention. Things like the 2017 government's decarbonisation strategy and the tripling by 2019 of offshore wind farms for generation. Then we had COVID and Brexit within a 12-month period. But we did have COP26 in Glasgow, and I think that pushed a lot of things up the agenda. It really propelled the UK particularly. We had one of the very first UN centres of excellence that we have in the world, but based in the UK for buildings. And the reason I sort of plotted all this out is because we find ourselves today where the net zero term is very divisive for a lot of people, rightly and wrongly. It is. People have association with negative economic impacts, a lack of political will, lower in public confidence, and unfortunately, more recently, sort of a populist exploitation of the term for something that only rich people can afford or invest in. And I think there's a lot of organisations out there that are keen to see net zero go, not just as a term, but with all the things that are good that go with it. And for me, the politics and the language is why we need to reframe it. And I talk to people in local authorities, I've talked to people doing other, in the NHS, for example. We do have now 6 political parties vying for control, with very, very different interpretations of where we need to be. And for me, what I'm starting to see is that although I'm in my team I'm in is called climate response, and I don't want to see that go. But I do think in the sort of public arena, net zero, climate and carbon are terms which are seen as extreme in one form or the other. And I guess if you asked, if you did a Mori poll, you might find a third of people think it's correct, a third of people that don't, and a third that's sitting on the fence. So what I'm trying to suggest here in this infographic is that trying to reduce the reliance on some of those politically and now emotive words. I try to think about well-being, resilience, sustainable economic development, for example, words that don't mean everything to everybody, but can't be anchored in a retrofit and housing, for example. Everybody lives in a house. Not everybody, unfortunately, the vast majority. So it's something that touches everybody. And if a local authority wants to do some work in retrofit, it's not contentious because it's not attached to climate. It's about keeping people warm, low cost. So it's about focusing on what matters to everybody. And for a local authority and work organizations they work for, looking at where the main consensus is, where people need to stay, that actually underpins this net zero, from my perspective, and climate narrative that we still need, but it's not necessarily at the moment. I think we'll see that change, what people want to hang it on. Just as an example, climate environmental leadership is the term that's now being more used in local authorities and DEFRA and other government departments, because I think it's undeniable for the majority that the climate is changing, whether they think it's to do with climate change, human impacts, etc. But the climate is changing. It's becoming more extreme. It's becoming more variable, and that we do need some form of leadership that responds to that, whether that's coastal erosion or flooding inland or whatever it might be. So I think the whole neuroscience around net zero or any organization involved in trying to do public good in that space, regrettably, for the time being, I think we're going to have to start to dumb down some of the net zero carbon and climate change type references. So in terms of sort of summing up, for me, it's not the end of net zero. Climate mitigation, adaptation, as I said, resilience and well-being will be priorities for many. There are local authorities out there who aren't supported by their political masters now because there's been a change, but are still doing good things and still need to be supported to do good things. Local authorities are going to be challenged, and there's a lot of change happening out there, not just if they're in a local government reorganisation or a devolved area. And there still will always be need for grassroots action, working with smaller groups at a local level to support the work they're doing and to pilot and to innovate in that space. And I've seen it across the country in many ways. I think the communities and third sectors, I'm hoping will grow. I mean, I've been involved in some circular economy projects in the last 3 years where we've specifically supported the third sector and charities and communities to help local authorities innovate in that space with those place-based endeavours or solutions. So I think there's always going to be a space there. And in terms of the narrative, I think it's the metrics that you want to put, so you've probably heard of natural capital, human capital, social capital, environmental, financial, physical, cultural, intellectual, and experiential capital as well, getting people to try things that they've never done before. And that's what we've always, certainly what I've been doing in the last 30 years with any of the sort of community-based projects, whether that's been Norfolk or down on the south coast or in Nottinghamshire or in any of the other areas that I've specifically worked in, but many of my colleagues have worked all over the country doing this. So that's my ramble, if you like, about where I see things changing. I think the term I would say is that there's always a renaissance. We go in peaks and troughs with these sorts of things. Hopefully they never go away, and there'll always be an opportunity to reflect on what happened 2, 5, 20 years ago, and to take that learning and evolve it even further. And I think there's a big opportunity still to do that, and people still need activity in this space. And hopefully local authorities can continue to work with communities, community groups, and those local organisations. So I think I probably overstayed my time welcome. So I'll stop there and stop sharing if that's all right.
Paul acknowledges that some specific topics during the Q&A session are outside his area of particular expertise, and thus his comments should be taken as his personal reaction to the question rather than his professional or local partnerships view. Paul, thank you very much. That was very fascinating and leads to a whole bunch of questions, which I'm sure other people will pitch in on. But the one I have is, you see yourself as a channel of communication between sort of the coalface, if you will, and upper government?
Yeah. I mean, we get asked by government departments. Sometimes we see a government department should be asking a question, and we can help them to define the question, and then help them with some of the discovery phase, if you like. So yeah, we're lucky, I guess, because we have board members who are in HM Treasury, and let's be honest, every government department is funded by the Treasury. So ultimately, departments are important, but the Treasury has all the money. And if we can offer through a range of public sector or local organisations a suggestion to do something differently, and that's the manifesto work we did last time, was like, is there a way to rethink this so you don't have to put more money and you get far more impact for what you're putting together? So those thought pieces are really important, and we don't, we're not always listened to, but we try to use those avenues to stimulate debate.
So if I were to say that down at the coalface, the parish people will say, we're very interested in retrofit, and it appears to be one of the biggest places where you get bang for your buck. So it must be high on everyone's agenda. And then you look at government and you say, what are the housing requirements being put out as a specification for build? And you discover that the current levels certainly mean that in order to meet net zero, all those houses are going to have to be retrofitted, even though they're brand new now. So whose job is it? And I'm looking at local partnerships to say, to explain why one branch of the government is operating in a completely different vacuum from the rest of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. And actually, we had our annual sort of 2-day where we try and bring as many of our 80+ staff together to discuss it. And housing growth, new build housing was a big issue. And I threw in a few challenges because prior to working for local partnerships, I was seconded to the Passive House Trust. And I've been working with colleagues in Scotland about the Scottish government accepting something called deemed to satisfy. They don't want to use the term passive house, but ultimately what we're talking about is build a building regs equivalent, which means that those new stock don't contribute to the burden of the existing stock.
Yeah, exactly.
In parallel with that, I've been doing quite a bit with the National Retrofit Hub, who have that evidence base that says, what is the minimum that we have to do so that doesn't happen. It's a current discussion point. Well, I will say that from colleagues both in the organisation and in other organisations I work with, the sort of minister Miata in charge of warm homes is acutely aware of what needs to happen, and we do know that there's a lot of houses out there, and I even throw the question out there, do we need that many houses? The population is not expanding. The way that we live is getting very different. I've got kids that within a couple of years will be probably want to get on the housing ladder, unfortunately for them, because it's not an easy thing to do. And I don't want them to buy houses that are going to be something that needs to be retrofitted almost immediately, because either the developers don't offer them the options which are mortgageable. My limited experience recently, but historically was far deeper, is that a lot of the mortgage companies, the lenders, the high street lenders, want to see greater levels of standards in new build and the opportunity to use the mortgage as a way to improve the properties that need significant improvements. it's not an answer to your question, but it is that you are right. And actually, going back to the NISPs side of the nationally significant infrastructure projects and planning requirements, is that retrofit is now being potentially an opportunity there, where if a significant amount of money at, say, 2 or 3 district level, where there is the infrastructure, Sizewell, for example, or an onshore wind major farm, or near to an offshore, where there is a community impact and the money's there to give a community benefit, it seems to me that retrofit is an opportunity for that, maybe a revolving fund. I've seen some 0% loan funds being set up in that regard. So I think it's trying to understand how these all play together. But you're right, we do need a significant rethink about what constitutes a good, sustainable, long-term, fit-for-purpose new build property across the UK, and that's quite a tricky thing. But a lot of people are working with us at the moment, and we are working with a couple of local authorities that are looking at it. But it's always difficult for that first pioneer to go, do you know what, we're going to put this planning in place. There's a couple of local authorities that I know are well placed to do that, and I'll put in some pretty strict, Cambridgeshire in particular, put some pretty strict requirements in their policies to do with new build. But I think we need to be stronger at it. Anyway, waffled on too much. I think a couple of hands up.
Just interesting to know you're talking about local districts coming up with their own rules for their own planning authorities, but how about at a national level? Are you getting any pushback from the department that is setting the minimum levels of insulation? How come they aren't going for more of a passive house standard? What's their argument?
The short answer is I don't know, because it's not the area that I'm specifically working at the moment. Before I joined local partnerships, there was always this conflict between the developer saying, if you push us too hard, we won't be delivering the housing levels you want, because they have a model that pays shareholders, and let's be honest, that's the way that the private developer sector works. What I am seeing now is a lot more local authorities and housing associations producing market housing at higher standards. There's a couple that I know of that are now, in fact, one in particular in my local area in Norfolk, who's actually shifted more away from social housing into market housing, but of a much higher standard. It's an exception rather than the rule, but I do take your point that we need to, maybe that's a question I take back to my colleague who leads on the housing side of things, who has that connection with government departments, and it's got to start somewhere. So I know he works in the Manchester area, so it might be, when you've got people like the Manchester Combined Authority and the leadership they've got there, maybe that someone's got to sort of step the stall out and to prove to government, I guess, that it is possible. But yeah, my dad said for the last 20 years, why have we not put solar panels on houses as standard and covered every piece of the roof and given them, this, from a simplistic point of view, he's not wrong. And we know in other countries they can do it. So yeah, it's not an excuse.
Thank you. And let's move on to Tristram, if we may. You're on mute, Tristram.
So sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Paul, thank you very much. That's really interesting. One of the challenges of the Great Collaboration is try to identify best practice to help councils, the smaller councils, to make a climate plan or to make a community solar energy plan or whatever it is. And one of the big barriers is if you're a parish and you look for guidance, you search online for guidance, and you talk to your district council, your unitary authority, there's a mass of guidance, and it's daunting for the parish to set about it. And so one of the things the Great Collaboration is trying to do is to identify best practice and boil these things down into a sort of single document. And I noticed when you said you make all your resources free for use, you and the local partnerships are probably in a very good position to decide and say from experience what is the best, what is a good model for creating those sorts of plans. Is that something that you can? Do you think that's appropriate for a parish level?
Yeah, again, if you want to sort of set me the exam question with regard to that and email it to me, then I'll use that to talk to colleagues about what we've got, and hopefully come up with and curate some sort of more focused set of resources that would be appropriate at the sort of parish level.
I think it could be really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question.
Thank you.
Is there more, or are we moving?
No, that's it. Thank you. Thank you.
Alan, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Paul, very interesting from my perspective, because we've got quite a lot going on in Shropshire with various bits of movements towards devolution, clustering of parishes around towns for the purposes of service protection, all those sort of things. But what I wanted to talk to you about was something that's deep to my heart in relation to carbon literacy training. Is an impact tool which is used by parish and town councils across the country, supported by the Centre for Sustainable Energy with Exeter University, where they put together a parish level carbon tool, whereas the one I understand that you're dealing with is actually for a local authority. Is that right?
It is correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there each time impact has to have the updates done to its background? They have to fight tooth and nail to get the support for the data to go into that database. So when it gets updated, which yours would get updated, is there not some continuity at government level with it, where you might be able to influence that they share that data without any additional cost? I'm just sowing a seed here more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, again, not my area of expertise, but actually my senior director, she leads on that particular tool, and a number of the other ones. So yeah, again, my default response, if you ping me an email with your specific sort of technical ask on that, then what I can do is I can use that to send top and tail an email and ask what we can do. And if it's something that needs sort of a more sort of national ask of it, then absolutely we can do that.
Because from a local partnership point of view, that would be working. Yeah, local authority you've got, and that's your bag, because those are the main people that you deal with. But when we're talking about doing it, which in this particular group, influencing parishes to understand what their carbon footprint is, that tool is an absolute godsend, because it gives them the line in the sand by which they've got to work effectively. So
yeah, I mean, it's that, you need that evidence base to start from, so that everybody's using the same methodology. So I absolutely get that. But yeah, obviously, without going into sort of great detail now, but if you do send me an email, I will respond to you and just make sure I fully understand the question, so that I can go and speak to others. And then if they need to talk to the LGA, or they need to talk to a number of other organisations. I mean, carbon literacy, just to touch on that point, a friend of mine was from Nottingham University. She used to do all the carbon literacy for the university there, and she worked with me on one of the circularity projects. So when just before I left that the university, I sort of found out a little bit more about it. And actually, in local partnerships now, we're looking at not because we don't know, we know a lot about what the context of the carbon literacy program is, but I think as a demonstration that we are, equivalent to knowledge with everybody else, that I think it's something that we're now looking to do internally. So I think we're going to have our own version of carbon literacy provided by those and endorsed by them. So it's, we can best articulate and talk in the same language that other organisations that are carbon literate officially as an organisation. So it's a good point.
Well, if you have a chat with the Carbon Literacy Trust, they will be the people. Fine, okay, because their background is immense, and their network is immense, which would help you as well from your local partnership working too.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul.
Thank you.
There you go, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Graham. Thank you very much, Paul, for very interesting. I want to briefly mention a local partnership, which seems to me, it's certainly around where I live, which is Somerset, doesn't actually exist. and that is the partnership between the people who own land and DEFRA, who provide money, and us lot in at the coalface, who are getting quite good at setting up nature recovery schemes.
Yeah.
We've just got one in my parish that's just got recognised as a local nature reserve, and it's on land that is not owned by anybody. Well, it is owned. It's owned by the people who build the roads, and British. What do they call themselves now? Not
Highways England.
Highways England. Is it just? It's
Okay.
not Highways England. Is it Highways England? It's something else now, isn't it? British Highways, something like that. Anyway, we've just got a small nature reserve there. It's working. We know how to do this kind of thing. Live on the edge of the Somerset Levels. There's a lot of people in, I think you call them the third sector, that really small voluntary groups that are trying to do something, but we don't have the land and we don't have the money, and there doesn't seem to be any mechanism for bringing those three together. It seems an uneasy relationship, and I wonder whether you've got any reflections on that.
Not immediately without giving it some thought. What would you, if you had a genie in a bottle and you were going to rub it, what would it look like, that solution to your question?
Well, we have ways of implementing environmental schemes, but farmers are not particularly interested in these around here because it involves so many administrative difficulties. That instead what happens is that marginal land now, since the end of the basic payment scheme, is now being ploughed up by huge machines, not by the farmers themselves, but by people that have been commissioned to produce maize crops and that fast growing ryegrass. So we've lost an awful lot of old meadowland because it's been ploughed up to the quick growing ryegrass, so that you can get a couple of hay crops or 3 hay crops a year while the weather permits. And this year the weather has permitted because the machines haven't got bogged down. We're mainly in wetlands down here. And things have gone wrong since the basic payment scheme was abandoned, so that the farmers are not getting money for owning marginal land, and they're finding it very difficult to devise schemes which will attract environmental schemes, and they're finding it very easy to cooperate with people who are with local huge dairies who can hire vast tractors and so on that can cope with the kind of land that we've got, the heavy clay that we've got. And there's we're rather desperate.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of experience in that area. I mean, I do know that there's a few projects led by or a project, I think about 12 or 13 chief execs, one being the Cornish one. They're talking to the Eden Project, Soil Association, and a few others about how land might be repurposed and brought back into Port Investment sort of community ownership, and how that might then allow different organizations to access it. Now, I don't know whether that's the sort of thing that will be a benefit from your perspective. Are you looking to see whether there's better access to land and or money available to do with land that you do have access to? Is that the sort of space that you're trying to?
I would like to devise some mechanism for assisting farmers to look after their marginal land rather in a rather more environmentally sound way than is now happening. And I agree, Cornwall is an interesting example, I think, where there's a lot of interesting things happening.
Yeah, one of my colleagues is doing a piece of work for DEFRA at the moment, so I'll replay that back to her at the moment. I mean, obviously DEFRA is many different organisations sitting under that Environment Agency, etc. And one of my other colleagues is an ex-Environment Agency, so he's quite useful at sort of understanding in that space. I do know the Local Government Association are talking to organisations about how we utilise land, for want of a better term, as sort of carbon sinks, if you like. So having them to be used rather than for sort of intensive agriculture or whatever, and that includes local authorities with very large or aggregate amounts of land around highways. So a lot, a lot of verges and those sorts of things. And I know that's not specific to your question, but I do know there's all sorts of different ways that they're looking at improving soil structures, for example, because that locks in carbon. And I know that's not answering your question, but it's an important area. But I'll ask my colleague Jo about the work that she's doing with DEFRA, because it is a live piece at the moment. There might be something in there that might be able to weave in.
There is an example near us with DEFRA working with a number of organisations like the RSPB particularly and the Somerset Wildlife Trust, where they're getting together with about 100 farmers. The money will come from environmental management pot. But you see, all that is on the Somerset levels, which is an SSSI and a Ramsar site and so on. We are not on the Somerset levels, we're off that. And so we're in all parts of the country that don't benefit from any special considerations. And so we're right at the end of the list, when it comes to allocation, when it comes to schemes that allocate money like that. And
so a scheme that is a bit more inclusive sounds like would be that doesn't just cope with the margins. It's more about the others that don't fit into one of those categories or geographical. Okay, I'll have a think about that.
Thank you.
Well, I've been looking at your website and listening to what you've been saying today, and it doesn't mention anywhere how one goes about borrowing your services or employing them, and B, whether there's any cost to doing so. You do talk about returning profits to the government.
So one of the things our owners, the three organisations, is that we have to charge for our services, because we don't receive any funding from those owners. They're there to basically purposes into local authorities in the public sector, and like I said, we have done work for the NHS, and it normally resides is that by the work that we do then returns in a financial benefit at the end of it. So we don't do work for free, unfortunately, but we can do work for groups of organisation when we do work, for example, with the LGA. So if they say we need you to work for a group of local authorities, sometimes we'll get a small grant for that chunk of work. But that's what we're sort of set up to do. Like I say, officially we're a private organisation, we're an LP. So that's the way that we have to do the work. We often do a lot more work than we charge for. That's quite part of the course.
One of the examples you gave was working with Hart District, which I'm assuming is the Hart District Council in Hampshire.
Hart. I think I mentioned Hart. I don't think I mentioned Hart.
Yes, you did in one of your slides.
You did
a card.
That'll be a colleague's piece of work. Apologies, that. Let me just have a quick. Let's have a look. Let me just quickly whiz back through my slides.
One of the earlier ones in examples of the sort of work you've been doing.
It's a carbon reporting boundary.
And establishing the emissions baseline. I'll have to look at when that piece of work was done. Some of those, that's probably a piece of work we've done in the last 18 months, I would guess, because the slides we tried to refresh them.
Do you have to compete? Do you have to compete with the private sector when you're for some of your work?
It very much depends. So we will tender for work. And we will whether it's a completely open tender or a 3-quote tender, we have a status called TECL. So TECL status is our owners can ask us to do work for them, which is procurement exempt because that we're owned. So all the local authorities in the country, bar 2, don't ask me which 2, but there are 2 that aren't members of the local government association, are our owners. And there are benefits to that for a local authority. One is it means that they, as I mentioned before, on the 1st of March can ask for a piece of work, get it done by the end of March, because they need to get it done by the end of the financial year, for example. We also, as I sort of alluded to, is if we do a piece of work and we do a couple of days and actually said, you know what, this isn't going to take 3 weeks. We've done the work. We've gone to existing resources that we've got, and we give you the answer. We just cut it and say, okay, it's 2 days. It's 2 days. We don't need to work for the next, 2.5 weeks and charge you accordingly. As where if you do something under a contract, normally it's normally and very rare that a local a private company or SME would then go, oh, actually, no, you don't need to pay us the rest of the money, because they've invested in that particular contract, for example. The other thing that it enables us to do is pivot. So quite often we'll do a piece of work, we'll spend a couple of 3 days doing the discovery piece, for example, and in that we then determine that actually the requirement that they've asked us to do the whole project on is different. Actually, there's the discovery phase has determined that what you're asking for is not actually what you need. So we then replay it back to them, and because it's not within an open tendering process, for example, they then don't have to vary the contract or go out to another procurement to get somebody in because it's a different piece of work. We can say, okay, you said you allocated this amount of work for us or this number of days. If you would like us to, we can pivot and go straight for that. So you don't lose any time, you don't lose any cost in terms of a re-procurement process. And that's the sort of basis on the way a lot of local authorities have found us ultimately flex. And we're one of the only organisations that sit in that space. And yeah, it's not for everyone. Sometimes they like us to go into an open procurement, and that's fine, we'll do that. We don't always win it either. There are other organisations that we have a very, very experienced and, dare I say, older workforce, because we've all been working for 20, 30 years in this space. And so when quite often, another consultancy might have lots of junior people straight out of university, and that's fine, happy with that, but that will be cheaper for the local authority. It might take them longer to get to where they need to get to, and we can do it quicker because we've got a resource base that we can pull on. But yeah, we acknowledge and accept we're not always in that space that's suitable for everybody, but we're there if they're needed.
Well, Paul, thank you very much for what's turned out to be quite a fascinating hour. Thank you very much.
Really
And
good.
I think you've got a few people really hooked. So
Good. Well, I say if you want to collate emails from everybody or get them to email me direct, I don't mind either way. It depends what you prefer to do, and I'll do my best to respond to those in a more deeper, fuller, more research-based response.
well, that's tremendous. Thank you so much, and really
Thank you very
appreciate your time and effort. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. Good to see everybody.
You're very welcome. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.